Good afternoon. My name is Martin, and I'm going to do something which I've never done. I don't use social media apart from WhatsApp that much. I've certainly never been on Facebook, but I'm going to post a video on YouTube. I've no idea, of course, if anybody is going to be going to find the video or be bothered to listen to it. But I've reached a point, I think, after 9 months of feeling that the views of an ordinary citizen like myself are not really being heard, and that over these last 9 months, whilst I understand the strategy that the government has taken, from the very beginning I did have concerns about it. I nearly didn't record this video today because after watching and seeing the infection rate rise and all those marvellous key workers in NHS hospitals come on to the main broadcasters explaining how much they're under pressure, then I felt a bit guilty in actually recording the video with the sort of theme that I will be expounding over the next few minutes or so. But having listened to Matt Hancock answering a question on Talk Radio this morning and continuing with the same approach without hesitation, I felt that I just had to get onto onto something on social media to make my views known for as little as they will count, but at least it makes me feel good, and hopefully some people might find the video and chip in. I must admit I'd be far better doing this in a discussion group than actually doing it cold. I prepared a load of notes and my storyboard last night, and let's see how we go. And the reason really why I'm taking the theme I am, which is absolutely an anti-lockdown theme, is because from the very beginning I had reservations that locking down the whole country, the whole economy, with all the implications that would produce. I did feel that, and I wrote a letter to the Telegraph very early on saying that I felt the cure could well be worse than the disease, and that perhaps we are over exaggerating what was going to happen in terms of the way that this virus would spread. Clearly, having seen what was happening in Wuhan and then in Bergamo, I accept the government with their advisors had very little choice. But I started to listen to all the normal broadcasters and to listen to everything that the government was saying, and I just felt that whilst they were saying that a balanced approach was extremely difficult, that the balance over time has not been corrected, and a lot of the action taken have not been proportionate. I don't feel in some ways it's appropriate to go back over history, but unless you do that, you can't understand where I'm coming from, and my two main concerns after a few weeks following the 23rd of March lockdown was firstly the lack of real information that the government was sharing with us. Right at the very beginning, it was all about deaths and the number of deaths, and I was constantly saying, age groups, preconditions, because there's 5 main preconditions where people's immune system would be impaired and they'd be more vulnerable to a virus of this type. But there was very little, information from the government being shared. And then when you listen to the main broadcasters, they too, the amount of poor information or lack of education that the main broadcasters were presenting I just felt that there was something not quite right. So the sort of person I am, I started to look for other comments. I read the Telegraph, avidly most days, and I was seeing the sort of articles that some very well-known and credible journalists were placing in that paper, and then I started to look on different websites, and I found one which was Worldometer. And this was very early, after March 23rd, and this website gives a complete breakdown of the infection rates, deaths, age groups, and recovery rates. And one of the things that struck me quite early on was the United Kingdom was one of the few countries. In fact, at that stage, it was only the USA and the UK that weren't providing any information, right, on recoveries. And that is still the case, and I just felt that something was being hidden from us. And then as we progressed, obviously, originally we were told if you had symptoms, obviously stay at home. But very shortly after that, we had the statement about being asymptomatic, and that you could indeed be infectious and infect other people, even though you haven't got the symptoms. And that to me was quite a killer, because that instilled in people's minds and brains that a lot of doubt. They didn't have the symptoms, but indeed they could have it, and they could be giving it to others, including their families. I must admit, I would love to know. I'd love to hear a detailed presentation on the data that underpins that. And Professor Chris Whitty, has said recently that 1 in 3 of the population could well be asymptomatic. That is 20 million people. 20 million people walking around who haven't got the symptoms, but this is a disease. So with a disease, you normally there are normally symptoms. But that's the sort of thing that was instilled in the population, and of course that, in my case and of millions of others, of course, put them on the back foot. So and then we progressed, and then you start reading things like the pandemic reached its peak on the 12th of April, and the Prime Minister was constantly saying about flattening the sombrero, and we seem to be flattening it, but the course of action didn't change, and we continued onwards. And then the government clearly then did try to loosen the restrictions, and this is when the SAGE committee and lots of the other scientists within SAGE and say the CMOs then almost immediately said, no, this is the wrong thing to do, and they seem to find any way possible to keep the population in a state of fright. And then when we got to September time, again very very quickly they started to say about a second wave, and I feel that in terms of the data, and this is one of my main concerns, is the use of data has been very selective, right? Invariably it's been about deaths and infection rates, and of course the famous R rate, but and occasionally, obviously, at the press conferences, there were other statistics given on hospitalisation, ICU occupancy, etc., etc. But all the data, and there is a mass of data, and if you look across the internet, you will find a mass of data. I'm registered on the ONS website, but that is a huge amount of data which needs analysis and extractions from it to really understand it. But every time we got near some loosening the restrictions, then the frighteners would be put back in, and the second wave was talked about, but then we proceeded, and then of course the one when the government perhaps was going to loosen restrictions, there was long COVID was raised, and then of course we got to the 2nd of December, and again the medical and science community that the government, that small set of people this government seems wedded to, then just before Christmas came up with a new strain. Now that new strain was known about in September. Why did they wait until the Friday before, the last Saturday before Christmas to actually announce this new strain? So I must admit, I've my concern has been that the population hasn't been kept fully in the picture. The use of data has been very selective, and it's resulted in me believing that there's half-truths, or even worse, that there's an agenda and a narrative that will not be changed. I actually believe that we're in a classic situation of where, and human beings are because of how we are the worst at admitting when they're wrong, and and certainly those that are in power and in control don't want to appear to have lost faith, because that will undermine the confidence of the population in the decision they're taking, and this has resulted in now the current situation, yet again. I've to underpin my views about this, the course of actions we've been taking are not proportionate. You only have to look at some of the statistics, and I know there's damn lies and statistics, but as I said, I really do not feel that the government has been transparent on this. Out there's been a different set of group of scientists, 12,000 of them, lots of which I could name. And I've listened to many presentations whose views have never really been allowed to be debated and discussed. They've been kept off to one side, in the margins, in the fringes of things. I thought a disgusting article in the Guardian quite recently, where there was a few of these scientists that, with the introduction of Steve Baker, the MP of High Wycombe, introduced just prior to the decision on the 2nd of December, and the Guardian maintained that those scientists should never have been put in front of the Prime Minister. Well, I totally disagree, right? If you've got executive power, then you surely must listen to others that have a differing point of view to be able then to take a quality decision. And that's the sort of thing that has undermined my trust in certainly in the recommendations that SAGE have been making and the government have been accepting. As I said, some of the statistics, I can roll out loads of statistics, but so some of the ones that I think are quite key is that it was kept sort of under wraps at the very beginning that obviously it's the elderly, and I'm 70, so it was the elderly that are going to be most affected by this virus. And reading here, 89% of the deaths to date are 65 and over, and 95% of those, right, have medical preconditions. And I think the Mail Online and Talk Radio has been one of the main broadcasters that I found have offered a different point of view and have interviewed people. I mean, the BBC, who have they interviewed? They interviewed Ian Duncan Smith once, and a couple of the scientists with a different view once. But Talk Radio has been continually interviewing these scientists and medics who have got a differing point of view. And a pretty critical statistic was revealed, quite in the last few days, that only three, and I say only, of course, any death, is a tragedy. I lost my father at age 63, so I know, but only 388 people under 60, right, with who have been healthy, right, without any preconditions, have died. And we're now at 71,000 plus, which I would point out is just over 0.1% of the whole population of the United Kingdom. So, and there's lots of other statistics. 47% of those 89% 65 plus have been 75 plus. So I'm 70. I've lived my life. I've had a full life. Of course, I'd like to live to 80. But, we've got to consider, right, other members of the population, right? And it's the young that are going to suffer here. As I said, the 18 to 30-year-olds are going to be without employment if we're not careful. The economy, the deficit is 2 trillion. As Ivor Cummins said, what are we doing to ourselves? And so we've reached this juncture. I'd like to just add one other aspect of mistrust that I would like to point to, and this is the whole question of PCR testing. Now, not many people know this, but a paper was prepared for MPs dated the 26th of November that was available to them before the decision was taken on the 2nd of December for further areas to go into tier 3 and tier 4 lockdowns. And this paper highlights what went on in Liverpool, right, and in particular how inappropriate PCR testing, that is the swab testing, is for mass testing, right? And again, how many people really know this? But when the government decided to go for mass testing, they, rather than using the 44 NHS labs, they decided to set up some super labs. They're called lighthouse labs, and there were initially 5 of those. And those labs were brought into service very, very quickly, and the staff had to be recruited. The staff had to be trained, and when they started the mass testing, there was thousands and thousands of completed swabs sent to these super labs. Now, the problems with setting those up, and the problems that they seem to cause in terms of false positive testings, was highlighted by Channel 4 in a dispatches program, and it was very illuminating. There's also been a whistleblower in the lab in Milton Keynes, and what concerns me is that none of this ever comes to light. You have to look on the fringes of information, on the fringes of the internet, to find that information, and that leads me to believe that we're not being told the whole story. So these are some of my concerns. I could probably waffle on for ages, but all I continue to do, and I would implore others to do this, particularly now, because we aren't at the end of this. It's quite clear, and it's quite clear that Professor Neil Ferguson, who, in my view, is very, very much discredited. He was discredited at the beginning with his model that said 510,000 people could die if we don't have a national lockdown. He discredited himself in terms of breaking the restrictions. He's now found himself on nerve tag, and produced a very interesting article, or wrote an interesting article in the Times just recently. So, but we aren't at the end here, and they are going to be advocating in the next few days for a further national lockdown. I don't know how much further we can go. Tier 4 seems pretty comprehensive to me, but the only place we can go is not allowing the schools to open, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But I would implore people to look. You won't get any information that's controversial with the BBC, even Sky News, Channel 4, ITV, right? There are reasons for that. If you've only got to look at the Ofcom code on the 26th of May to see that those broadcasters are encouraged, if that's the right word, to follow a certain line. It's only been papers like the Daily Telegraph and of late the Mail, and particularly Talk Radio, and also I've been on Lockdown Skeptics. I haven't mentioned that, but because as soon as you say Lockdown Skeptics, people listening to me, if they ever get round to listening to me, will think, oh, he's a lockdown, he's an anti-lockdown zealot, and that certainly isn't the case. My views from the very beginning is it is a difficult balance. It's got to be proportionate, but it does concern me that how selectively that data has been used, and how the approach that's been taken has been presented. I would love to have seen a discussion between the sage set of scientists and the other scientists, a very visible discussion. But at least I would certainly like to feel that that discussion has been held with, held with key ministers who are making these decisions. Otherwise, for me, it just comes across they're completely wedded to this very small set of scientists. And I have to say, in SAGE, there's many more what I would call non-scientists, such as psychologists and sociologists, than there are actual medical professors of epidemiology, etc. So please, anybody listening to me, please go and listen to Talk Radio. I'm not a promoter of Talk Radio, but it's because particularly people like Julia Hartley-Brewer has constantly interviewed people like Professor Carl Hennigan, the Dr. Mike Yeadon, etc. And you get a different point of view, because I think at some stage that the people should be asked how we want to proceed. I'm going to go away from here and trying to encourage some sort of petition to be raised with government in terms of the next stages, because my fears now, and getting to the point, the final points of this fairly long piece of waffle, my final point is that we aren't at the end here. Two things are now going to happen. Of course, wonderful news, we have now 2 vaccines, right? But the SAGE scientists and the others around them are now saying that we've got to vaccinate 80, perhaps 90%. It started off at 60%, but gradually, the editor-in-chief of the Lancet very quickly got to 70%, and now it's 80, and I've even heard 90% of the population, the whole population, have got to be vaccinated before we can end these restrictions. That has to be discussed. Of course, I totally endorse that. I don't know why key workers in the hospitals aren't being made a priority, because they're front line, and quite clearly that they should be. I also believe that parts of the population, such as teachers, because I'll come back to that in a minute. Children need to stay at school, and if that means that teachers need to be protected, then let's do it. Leave me till near the end. I mean, I'm being sensible and have been throughout this, and so is my wife, who should be shielding, and she's been sensible. But let's protect those parts of the population that continue. That make it work for the whole economy, and certainly various parts of the economy, particularly children. So, but we can't allow, if we're going to target 90% of the population to receive the vaccination before we loosen even tier 3 restrictions, let alone tier 4 and beyond, then I really do fear for the whole economy and for jobs. So that is for me a key issue, and that needs to be discussed, and I would like to see that discussed more openly and more transparently. So we can't wait. Herd immunity has been a key issue discussed between scientists. And clearly, the main route to herd immunity is through vaccination. But we've got to let those that are economically active, the 18 to 59-year-olds at the very least, to be able to get back to normal to normal life and start to get the economy moving again. Otherwise, I do fear greatly for the whole population of this country. So that's my plea. I've no idea whether I'm going to record another video. I've been 25 minutes so far, which seems an eternity, and probably to people listening is that as well. And some have probably even if they found me, have probably switched off by now. But I don't know. I probably from now on will, if there is any interest or any comments, and I am going to go onto Twitter. I haven't decided my Twitter name. I did decide at one stage Pops Matters. Pops, using that because my grandchildren call me Pops. So it seems appropriate, and rather than being a controversial name that people would read and immediately form a view. But I will be setting up a Twitter account. So I think it's about time I ended now. So please, for final plea, go and look for other views. Right, write to your MP if you have differing views. I've been writing to my MP for many weeks, and that seemed to it seemed to influence him a little bit, along with, I'm sure, I am a member of the Conservative Party, by the way. That seemed to influence him, and he certainly voted. He was one of the 34 that voted down the lockdown before the 2nd of December one, and one of the 55 that voted again for a more proportionate approach. And that's my plea. That at the moment we've had a very one-sided, in my view, now imbalanced approach, and we need a more proportionate approach, and that's what I would earnestly request of the government, and also for the members of SAGE. I think it's going to make a scrap of difference what I think to SAGE, and I've listened to many of the Professor Semple, etc. I don't think it's going to make a scrap of difference to them. They seem to have an agenda which I really fully don't completely understand, other than, I give them the benefit of the doubt that their professionalism means that they believe they're recommending and advising the right course of action. But the government has to take a far more balanced and proportionate approach, and I hope in the next decisions that they will be taking, certainly about schools, and certainly about when we decide that a sufficient percentage of the population has been vaccinated to actually start to get back to some real normal. So I'm going to sign off for now. If you have found this video and you found it interesting, then I think my Twitter name will probably be something like Popswarrior or Pops Politics. I don't know. I do have views about other aspects of our wonderful country that, in my view, but I would say that, wouldn't I, because I'm an old fogey. I do have concerns about other ways that this country is going, and that's without discussing Brexit. So I'll sign off for now, and if a journalist that I very much respect, Peter Hitchens, Peter, I used to disagree with you quite a lot when I've listened to you in the past, but of late, listening to you on Talk Radio with Mike, etc., and also today with Mark Dolan, I very much want to accord with an awful lot of your views. So I think I have relaxed a little bit during as we progress through this video. Nowhere near as relaxed as you, Peter, when you deliver what you very professionally deliver in a very calm and considered way. So, perhaps I'll send you a tweet, Peter, at some stage. All right. Okay. Sign off for now. Bye for now.